Alabama on Thursday executed a prisoner with nitrogen gas in what was the first use of a new controversial method of capital punishment. Human rights groups, UN torture experts, and lawyers had sought to prevent it, saying the method was risky, experimental, and could lead to an agonizing death or non-fatal injury. Kenneth Smith was convicted of the 1988 murder for hire of Elizabeth Sennett. He was one of only a few prisoners to have survived an execution attempt. In 2022, Alabama officials aborted his execution by lethal injection after struggling for hours to insert the needle in his body. In Smith's second trip to the execution chamber on Thursday, executioners restrained him in a gurney and strapped a respirator mask to his face. A canister of pure nitrogen was attached to the mask that, once flowing, deprived him of oxygen. Alabama Corrections Commissioner John Hamm told reporters the execution had gone as expected.
Appeared that Warren Smith was holding his breath as long as he could, and then there's also information out there. He struggled against his restraints a little bit, but there's some involuntary movement and some agonal breathing, so that was all expected and is in the side effects that we've seen or researched on nitrogen hypoxia. So nothing was out of the ordinary of what we were expecting.
Smith's spiritual advisor, Reverend Jeff Hood, who was at Smith's side for the execution, gave his own account.
What we saw was minutes of someone struggling for their life. We saw minutes of someone heaving back and forth. We saw spit. We saw all sorts of stuff from his mouth develop on the mask. We saw this mask tied to the gurney and him ripping his head forward over and over and over again. And we also saw correction officials in the room who were visibly surprised at how bad this thing went.
5 journalists who were allowed to watch the execution said that after the nitrogen began to flow, Smith shook his head and writhed on the gurney for about 2 minutes, then breathed deeply for several minutes more before his breathing eventually became imperceptible. Before the nitrogen was switched on, Smith made a lengthy final statement that began, quote, "Tonight, Alabama caused humanity to take a step backward." Leading up to the execution, Smith had mounted legal challenges in federal courts, arguing that Alabama's new method amounted to unconstitutional, cruel, and unusual punishment. The U.S. Supreme Court's conservative majority ultimately rejected Smith's final appeal to delay his death. Oklahoma and Mississippi have also approved nitrogen asphyxiation methods for executions, but have yet to deploy it.
Call this execution justice for the Sennett family. And it's because it took over 3.5 decades for the sentence to be carried out. I want to tell the family, especially the victims' sons, Mike and Chuck, how genuinely sorry I am for the horrific manner in which their mother lost her life. But I also want to apologize to them for how long it took for this sentence to be carried out. I watched the family address the media last night, in which they showed remarkable humility and grace in the most difficult circumstances that no one else would want to be in. But you know that forgiveness and justice are not mutually exclusive, and their words will stick with me for a long time. I hope the family has taken some comfort in the events of last night in knowing that there were men and women in this office who did not back away, when it would have been easy to do so, and other states may have done the same thing. But instead, they continued to fight. And a tremendous thank to Commissioner John Hamm and his dedicated team at the Alabama Department of Corrections. Everyone in this room knows they are the first team in the country to carry out nitrogen execution, and what occurred last night was textbook. They deserve a great deal of thanks and credit for being willing to be the one to step up first in the country to do so, and I now suspect that many states will follow. As of last night, nitrogen epoxy as a means of execution is no longer an untested method. It is a proven one. And it's the method that Kenny Smith ultimately chose, along with now 43 other death row inmates in our state. And thanks to the Fair Justice Act, which our administration passed during our first year in office, we are finally starting to see these cases move faster. It is my hope that one day, sooner rather than later, that the Alabama Attorney General won't have to stand up here and talk about how many decades some families had to wait before justice was served. To my colleagues across the country, many of which were watching last night, Alabama has done it, and now so can you. And we stand ready to assist you in implementing this method in your states.
All right, got a couple minutes. Homer.
Thanks. Speaker Johnson sent a letter.
Last night, Alabama executed a man with nitrogen gas, which is the first time that that new method has been used. I'm wondering if the White House has any reaction to that.
Yeah, we do. The reports of Kenneth Smith and his death last night obviously is troubling. It is very troubling to us as an administration. It is very troubling to us here at the White House. It underscores why the president support the Attorney General's moratorium on federal death penalty, pending review of the policies and procedures governing its use. The president has long said and has had deep concerns with how the death penalty is implemented and whether it is consistent with our values. So we are deeply troubled by it, by what we heard about Kenneth Smith's death, and so it is just troubling to hear. The death penalty is something that he has deep concerns, and he feels like the way it's implemented, and he questions, right, deep concerns on whether it is consistent with our values. So that is something for sure that he's been consistent about. It is troubling. The use of nitrogen gas, of course, it is troubling. It is troubling to us. And so there's been a moratorium from the Attorney General on federal death penalty, a pending review. We need to look into this, pending review of the policies and procedures. And so, yes, there's a more broad, obviously, concern of the death penalty. Guys, I got to go to a meeting with the president. Have a great Friday, guys.
Thank you.